Okay, we're running a little bit over time, but maybe perhaps we could just go with one question that I have, and really it is to address this perception, Surin. How do you address this? How can media address this bad perception that you talk about amazing figures that the RSPO certified plantations, such a small number have fires breaking out, and then they probably put them out very quickly. They're very transparent. They say, okay, we do have fires, but we've put them out, and this is where they are, blah, blah, blah. And yet it's like, your RSPO certified, you should have zero fires. And then it becomes conflated to the entire oil palm industry everywhere, basically being responsible for fires. Like, how can this be addressed, or can it not?
Yeah, I'm not sure to what extent it can be addressed. Certainly, the media has a role to play. I'm not saying that you should suddenly all become oil palm champions. I mean, certainly the oil palm industry are not totally guilt-free. They are still responsible for a significant amount of the deforestation. There are no angels in the oil palm industry, but it's just the imbalance that I think that we need to address, right? Because there are other causes of deforestation and haze. So if we are too palm oil fixated, you are losing sight on all the other drivers of deforestation, whether it's the maize growers or the durian farmers or the sugarcane farmers and so on. So that's something that you need to keep in mind. Also, there's this north-south kind of divergence, right? The global north, I mean, not north and south within Southeast Asia, but the north and south, west, east and west, right? Because, for example, whenever you have forest fires happening in California or in Australia, the narrative that you get is that, poor people, they're losing their homes, the forest being cut, being burnt and all that kind of stuff. But you don't have the kind of anger that comes when fires are happening in Southeast Asia, right? You don't have the whole world being angry at Southeast Asians saying, why are you having fires and why are you not putting out your fires, right? We don't have that kind of attitude towards the Californians or the Australians when they are having fire. When I was saying, hey, you're causing climate change, put out a fire. No, we tend to sympathize. Say, we're very sorry that that's happening. So why do we have that kind of difference in perception?
Yeah. No, absolutely. This is definitely food for thought. And thank you very much. Anybody got any questions? You just drop them in here. Okay, Surin, do you have any intervention, please?
Yeah, I mean, just an observation. I think it's very relevant to talk about narratives and perceptions, because I think that there's a lot of science, but the science can also be seen from different lenses, right? You can read a piece of fact, but then you can choose to interpret in different ways. Right? So as you can see, unfortunately, I think it's a tough job for journalists, because if you go into too much detail, you go too much jargon, you're gonna lose your audience, and the audience will be the general public in Southeast Asia. Right? So how do you balance it up between having too much detail, too much science, and then at risk of alienating your audience? But at the same time, if you don't point out the facts, present them in a systematic manner, the truth could be even harder to reach, right? And then in the midst of all of this, you have politics coming in and inter-regional, kind of conflicts, some deep-rooted cultural issues as well. The kind of friendly rivalry between Malaysia and Singapore, issues of cultural misappropriation between Indonesia and Malaysia, for example. So when you put it all in a mix, then you really do get a hazy kind of situation. So that's just an observation on my side. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Surin. Yeah, hazy was deliberate, right? Yeah, and I guess that's the thing. It's very challenging for journalists to try and keep in mind all these different things. The reporting got deadlines, and you've got to get the news story out there, and to try and keep all these different things in there. might be a little bit difficult. It is perception, and what the media does actually is, as media practitioners, we are responsible for shaping that perception. Yeah, I'm just going to come to one of the comments here. So Deborah says one of the pictures from the last slide was from your comics illustrator, which is why I really love that approach. So New Narrative came up with I think a series of 3 articles on the Haze in 2019, if I'm not mistaken. And one of them was just the approach was a very emotive one. It's a series of articles, illustrations, very poetic actually, and trying to get to the emotion of the impact of the haze on people. So many different ways of storytelling for sure. Yeah. And we have a question from Adib as well, who says, to what extent does terminology play a role in defining the narrative surrounding transboundary in Southeast Asia? Terminology as like saying that it is haze as opposed to
maybe I can try. I think maybe I can give some context to this. Perhaps, Adib, if I understand you correctly, the narrative terminology about haze in particular. So one of the things that was really interesting that I kind of discovered digging back into, where all this came from, what were the words being used to describe the problem. So because, ASEAN, even though the speaking language is English, but there was actually no standard term for haze. So for example, in Malaysia, we call it jerebu. But if you go to Indonesia and you ask somebody, ada jerebu tak this year? Nobody will know what you're talking about because they call it asap. So there's no standard term for haze. So actually, from what I gathered with my research, in the beginning, when ASEAN wanted to even address the problem, they had this issue. What should we call this problem actually? And there were several terms that was floated around. So for example, like smog or fog and stuff like that. But there was, apparently it was a very deliberate choice to use haze, because if you look in the dictionary, haze is actually a natural phenomenon. It's not a man-made one, as opposed to smog, which we know, like London smog, it's very industrial. It comes from the factories. So it seems like it's a very man-made thing. So at the time, all of this was very sensitive. We didn't want to point fingers. It's very much in the ASEAN way kind of thing. So the deliberate choice was made to not use the word smog and instead use the word haze, which is a bit more open-ended in terms of who's at fault. So don't really put focus on the fault, but more put focus on the solution of the problem. So this is why we use haze officially at ASEAN, and this has become to what we know today as haze is what we think of automatically. We don't use any other terms, especially in English. But it does, I think, play a part in how we understand and how we view the problem. And especially in the early years, there was quite a lot of difficulty to actually start even talking about what are the real drivers for haze in ASEAN. I think we've come a long way since then. But in the beginning, definitely this was a big political issue, a sensitive issue to even talk about what actually caused the haze. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Helena. Yeah, very, very good contextualizing. And yes, does that answer your question, Adib?
Yes, it does. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah. So terminology is something that's very tricky, and we're going to hear lots of this negotiations and stuff like that at ASEAN level from Larry afterwards, who actually was at some of the formulations of. So he was at very seminal points of trying to address this big issue. So it'll be very, very interesting to hear from him. Definitely, yeah. We have someone joining us from Frontier, Myanmar. Hi, how are you? And unfortunately, I think today's talk will be largely focused on the South countries and on the issues in the South. So please feel free to share. Everybody who's from the northern countries, and I really hate to have this North-South divide, but similar but slightly different kind of issues there. And please feel free to share. Putting a mic at the end to share any thoughts that you have of what's happening out there and how journalists are trying to cover the issues over there. Yeah, Larry, I have a question for you. Now, in terms of media coverage of the ASEAN's approach, and I know you're going to get into this, a little bit later. Have the narratives changed? You've been like Helena, studying this a long time, been in this formulating and all that kind of thing. Have narratives changed very much, or are you reading and listening and watching on TV the same thing over and over again?
Well, I think the narrative has changed. The public is generally more informed. There is science involved in being infused into discussion. And like I think it has been pointed out that science could also be, like Surin, I believe, pointed out, science could also be used, politicized as we see. And so there is that issue. So the level of discussion and narrative discourse, public discourse, is relatively sophisticated, I would say, because it's now we are talking about an informed public. But there are issues where the narrative degenerates into very political rhetoric, and as you already pointed out, Cillian, is also timed very much, suspiciously with the elections. So there are these issues that one has to be careful of. I mean, from our side and the researcher side, the media certainly needs to be aware that as the political temperature rises, the rhetoric also does the same. So I think that is. But generally, to get to your point, the language, the terminology, the vocabulary, the standardization of terminology is now there. I think, as Helena pointed out very well, there were issues in the beginning about using the word haze. There's no problem with that now, and people understand that. People also connect with one word issues rather than making it too nuanced and too complicated. Yeah.
Thanks very much for that, Larry. Yeah, we certainly look forward to hearing from you a little bit more. Surin, I'd like to come back to you as well. Now, you work both in Malaysia and Indonesia currently, although you've worked in many other countries as well. Is there a particular, you mentioned also like cultural differences between the two countries. Do you see that still being at play right now in terms of media coverage of it? Do you see this happening amongst other countries who are trying to deal with the transboundary haze?
Well, I think haze, like many other issues, have a tendency to, kind of emphasize any kind of intercultural issues or historical kind of conflicts. On the one hand, it can be quite lighthearted, but on the other hand, it can get quite serious as well, depending on the situation, right? So I don't think that these kind of issues can disappear completely. I mean, even when we're talking about food, for example, right, then people start saying that something is their heritage, and then you see another culture or country reacting to that, saying, no, hang on, that's ours as well. And so I think when you have a kind of a very controversial issue like haze, where there is a lot of finger pointing, I think those issues will come up again. So I don't really see how people can get away from that. But in the context of regional cooperation, then hopefully, at least at the kind of governance level, people would set aside those kind of differences, because those kind of conflicts tend to be at a more personal level, but usually when you have diplomats talking to each other, I mean, that they wouldn't usually have that in their way, and probably Larry can confirm that, right? So I think when it comes to regional cooperation, then people would just focus on the problem and see how they can solve that.
But perhaps we could get some interventions from the other panelists as well. And there's a question here to you. Basically, you spoke of the ASEAN Way. So this is famous ASEAN Way, right? To what extent has this policy of non-interference either helped or hindered the process of dealing with transboundary haze issues?
To help, say that again, how it helped or hindered?
Yes,
trying to look at
the ASEAN Way.
Oh, non-interference, yeah.
That's right, thank you.
Yeah, and this is the concept of, this should be looked at in the context of the concept of centrality, right? Centrality is that the definition of regional activities will be undertaken through the consensus of the 10. But within the consensus, that consensus is also driven by their own national perceptions and national interests. And so undermining or subsuming that centrality is really national sovereignty. So what drives that national sovereignty? Well, national interest first, and then comes regional interests, and see how the negotiations pan out, right? I think to look at that question, this policy is a bit nuanced in some cases, right? There are obviously some countries that are very much, they cannot drive or they cannot influence international affairs, external affairs, if they only are focused on national self-interest. What is self-interest? National self-interest for something like Singapore, which is very export-oriented, has an open economy. It's attracting advanced research industries and studies in science. Would that work in international relations setting? Of course, it would not, and that's why how non-interference works in different ways, and it's usually a factor of how open that economy is, and how liberal that economy is, and how much dependent on foreign investments. And because to me the idea of foreign non-interference is almost almost not even is a non-starter when you talk about non-interference, because most countries know, or most ASEAN countries know, as I told you, Indonesia made that big jump to become much more export-oriented. You don't have national interests. Those national interests have become trumped, to use probably a very bad pun, by international interests, just by the nature and characteristics of our economies. So it has not. Now, in the early stages, right, there was a lot of nationalism. I was there. I was in these meetings where people were shouting at each other. My farmers are suffering. My people are suffering, and so on and so forth. And you can't believe the language that was hurled at each other. I will never. That'll be maybe a subject of memoirs for those who are in the negotiating table. But since I was behind those who were behind the negotiating table, or feeding information on them, I can assure you these were not easy negotiations. They definitely brought up their national interests, and that was the beginning of this is important. This is a time when people had put up their basically explain what their real damage and what hurt has been caused by transboundary haze, and has became difficult because they had to bring up evidence. They had to look at maps. They had to look at telemetry, satellite imagery. So later on with this, the language, the tone became a little more subdued and a little more professional, just a little more.
Well, a little is great. I think when you've got 10 countries and everybody putting sort of nation first. So kind of addressing the issues that were raised earlier in the session as well. Yeah, Helena, I wonder whether you have any thoughts on what Larry has just said, or indeed his presentation, because you've been privy to and you've studied, actually done quite a lot of research on how ASEAN works.
Sorry about that. So Pak Larry, of course, has the benefit of having all the first-hand experience. So I'm sort of an external commentator or observer. But what I have been thinking about quite a lot since there was a question on the ASEAN Way is sort of how we understand the ASEAN Way, whether it is sort of something that the countries are bound to, or whether it is something that countries kind of use to their advantage when necessary. So I think this is something that we can contextualize in Haze quite well. So sometimes when you see it suits certain countries, we will see that certain countries kind of forget about the ASEAN Way. For example, sometimes Singapore has been accused to be very brash in how they talk about Haze and how they demand things and all that. And if you look at the definition, probably that could be considered, this is not very ASEAN. But at the same time, sometimes the other way around works. So a country will suddenly claim that, we have to strictly follow the ASEAN Way. It's extremely important. And this has come up during the Haze negotiations as well. In relation to sharing the maps. So sovereignty issues has been brought up. So I think the ASEAN Way is an interesting lens to view ASEAN and also to view the Haze, not only in terms of, to think about it, like, has it become so ingrained in the ASEAN culture that we can't think of another way to function in ASEAN? Or is it just something of a tool for governments to use to suit their interests? So Larry has, of course, raised the issue of national interest. So maybe we can leave it at that, and we can see whether any other of the journalists may have some thoughts on this as well.
Yeah, thank you very much for that, Helena. At the moment, no, there's another question from Adit, but before we get to that, actually, Surin, I'd like to ask you for your thoughts on what Larry has presented.
Yeah, thanks, Julian, and thanks, Larry, for that very thought-provoking presentation. Certainly, for most of us who are not at the negotiation table, we can only imagine what actually goes on there. So I think you've given us an idea of the kind of complexity that's faced by the ASEAN negotiators. I'm curious as to whether, to what extent the response to the Haze issue, and you can see from Larry's slides previously, where there have been a number of treaties, agreements at the ASEAN level related to the Haze and PEAT and so on, right? So my question is, to what extent have they been, to what has led to this kind of response? Is it mainly due to pressure from people in the individual countries? As in, is it a ground up kind of impetus, or was it mainly due to the technocrats that are involved in the negotiations? Was it really driven by the leaders of the different economies, or was it international pressure? So, or was it a mix of the above? So it would be interesting to find out from you, Larry.
Yeah, Larry, it's great. Great question, Surin. I'm just going to interject here a little bit, Larry, because it's very similar to what Adit has also asked. Like, who makes the final decisions? Who are the ultimate arbiters in the process? Thanks.
Yeah, the final decision makers. Well, this is the issue I was also going to make in actually the next slide that I would have presented to you. And the problem here is that the institutionalization of environment has allowed the technocrats to kind of hide behind strategies, action plans, and the management thereof, right, and the coordination mechanism. So you had this layering of who does what and why and when and why, and then you have essentially a diffusion or a dispersion of accountability. So there is, and this is the problem with international agreements generally. There's a cherry picking as to what an organization, a country can do, right? That happens even in UN conventions. but also on the AATHP. So, the question, my answer to who has that last role, in the end, nobody does, because the terms of the framework is so vague sometimes that it doesn't ascribe responsibility to one person or one country. That wouldn't happen. That is not the ASEAN way, right? It's the ASEAN way is, look, if it's all for one and one for all, why are you blaming me? You are also responsible, equally responsible, right? So that is kind of the excuse often given. It's not so much national sovereignty. It's more that, we started this together. You can't say all the initiatives that you put together were in place. You were supposed to develop my capacity here, and it didn't happen. So the expert will tell you that, well, in Cambodia, the monitoring capacity is X amount of percent as compared to, Philippines or something like that. So you get that into those number games, and in the end, it's a lowest common denominator game, right? You say, well, in that case, rather than saying such country was at fault, there's a whole systemic issue that is at fault. But this is the problem with this. It's the ability of, it's not so much the ability, but the conventions and the agreements that are made are such that it lacks real sanctions, right? It really lacks accountability as to who should be responsible for what. And you might have leads, but they're not the ones who are accountable necessarily. They're the ones who lead. So there are other parts of the pieces that need to do their job. And if they don't do it, then it's not the lead's fault, right? That's the problem with these agreements. They're so complex, they're so bureaucratic, they're so multi-layered that it's very difficult to really make a deep dive as to who's at fault, who's responsible, right? You need a new generation of frameworks and agreements that really are much more results oriented, much more accountable, has sanctions, has enforcements, and addresses this institutional culture, which we kind of sidestep, but this institutional culture that is prevalent in these large organizations, right? The UN faces that, and ASEAN is no different.
That's really, really honest and a great insight. We look forward to your memoir. There'll be lots of buyers here of your memoir for sure. Yeah. But talking of, thank you very much for that, Larry. I have a question for you, Helena, and it's also related to something that Surin had said, right? Government figures, gross underreporting. 100,000 deaths, and you say, okay, 19 people died. That's almost a farce, right? This kind of underreporting, I think it's like, we've got to save our own asses kind of thing. We have to look after ourselves, and as Surin mentioned, conversely, that when the government tries to put out figures about, okay, this is actually what's happening on palm oil plantations in Indonesia, people don't believe them. So this whole thing about people not believing anything that government says, how can we overcome that? What should media do to overcome this distrust and cynicism over government figures?
Yeah, that's a really big issue, I think, in the whole sort of palm oil conversation. It's sort of a chicken and egg situation. We can't really trace back where it all started. But I think one of the important things that we can look back on is that a lot of the governments that, or the Indonesia, Malaysia even, tend to react very defensively when it comes to these accusations, and not only just like as a group, like Indonesia and Malaysia against the world, but even Indonesia defensively against Malaysia, like the example that you have shown, So when this happens, it becomes very hard to even be trustworthy. Even when you do put out proper figures, well-researched figures, people will always not take it very seriously, because the first thing that you had said was that, no, none of my companies have burnt, for example, like what Malaysia said. And then when they do come and give you some figures, they're like, but you just said that day that you are entirely not at fault. So how come suddenly now you are trying to justify and stuff like that? And I think this is what is facing, like what Indonesia and Malaysia is facing against the EU right now. So when EU is trying to have certain restrictions on palm oil for biofuels, and then Malaysia and Indonesia is trying to say, no, but look, our calculations show that we are doing all right, and you should give us a chance. But the EU is just saying, oh, we don't believe you. So that's that's again comes down to the science. Even though you are studying the same thing, as you would know with climate change science, the answers can also be very different. And even within Malaysian scientists, you would see differing views as well. Some scientists would say we can manage peat. Some scientists would say no way, you should not even touch peat. So the science is also out. The government is not being very cooperative. The answer first is always just no. You did this? No, we did it. And then like, oh, actually like this. So it makes things like the MSPO, ISPO not as strong as it could have been. And even RSPO, just because of association, it started in Malaysia. Even EU is saying maybe RSPO is not even strong enough now, and they're looking at their own mechanism. So I think it's a problem of our doing. And we really have to work on our PR actually. And to the key, like what Surin has pointed out, is to make the world understand that not all palm oil is the same, and there is sustainable palm oil out there, and we are working very hard to go towards that. And palm oil should not be just looked at as a broad brush. You should be supporting sustainable palm oil, so that there's an initiative and there is a economic incentive for more companies to go into sustainable palm oil. Because at the moment, it's not profitable. Companies are just doing it because if not, they will be vilified in the media. But it's not profitable to do so. So unless it becomes profitable, unless there's enough demand, it won't be worth. The companies now will just be whatever. There won't be new companies picking up, because the ones who are already there are the ones who can afford it. The ones who are not there are looking at the market. If it's worth it, I will become sustainable. If it's not, I'm not going to waste my money. So that is the problem now. You have to communicate, the media has to communicate that sustainable palm oil is a thing, and it's a thing to be supported. Yeah.
Sure, great. That's really good. I'm going to go on to another question, which I'd like to address to everybody actually. And this is about the notion of crime, right, that you had raised. When I first heard about this approach of yours, I thought this is very fascinating, because it's something that I think media don't really cover, because it's complex. It appears to be a very big topic to understand. So my question to you and to the others as well. So first to you, Helena. Saying that there's a crime implies that there's a criminal. Okay. Now, I think for myself, on the part of media, it's very easy to say that's the bad guy. We are the good guys. Or, like palm oil within Malaysia are the bad guys and they should be punished. So the palm oil companies operating in Indonesia are the bad guys. So they're the criminals and they should be punished, right? Now, how does that affect transboundary Haze narratives in the media? Does it reduce the sense of responsibility when you say something like that? Is it a crime? Okay, so that's for you, Helena. So I'll just get the questions out to all three of you. Yeah. For Surin, how would you respond to that? Okay, to that same question, but also in context of another question that has come in: how does good governance effectively curb deforestation? So again, good governance means there's bad governance. Does bad governance means there's criminals involved? Yeah. So just hold that thought. I'll come to you. And finally, to Larry, how would ASEAN take to considering transboundary Haze as a crime against humanity? I think we might know the answer to that. But anyway, so Helena first, please. Thank you.
Okay. That's a very sort of broad question. Maybe I can contextualize it in terms of what I work on, which is patronage, which I didn't talk about directly, but maybe I can just link it here a bit. So thinking about who's actually at fault. So for example, back in the day when I was doing my research, when there was actually still a lot of fires happening on plantations, patronage was something very important, because what we found was that, number one, palm oil should not really be on peatlands in the first place, because it is protected lands most of the time. So the very fact that plantations are even established on peatlands, that itself is a crime in a way. It's against environmental law, or rather against the regulations. So you would see then, this is the start of the evidence of the patronage culture. How is it possible that these plantations could end up on peatlands? That's because there's a lot of collusion going on in getting licenses and subverting EIAs and stuff like that. So there's a lot of collusion between the government and the plantations as well. And everybody knows that this is something common in Southeast Asia, right? There's very close relations between governments and big companies, powerful companies. So that itself, when you already establish yourself in the first place in a circumstance that is beneficial to you, it becomes very easy for you to get away with a lot of things. So in the past, even though there were fires in plantations, they were using fire, hardly anyone got caught for it, right? In my fieldwork, I've heard stories like, for example, what do you call this? The policemen will come and investigate the fires, but they will purposely investigate during Friday prayers. So nobody is around. So they'll be like, oh yeah, we went, but nothing, that kind of stuff. So it's a collusion thing that's happening. And even if something goes to court, you'll get thrown out and stuff like that. So who's the criminal here? Is it the court? I mean, is it the company, or is it the government? That's why I say the governance is actually on the root of this. And connecting to that, this idea of criminality as well, that's why I say you have to look at it in a landscape approach. Companies, they are there. They should be responsible for their villagers who are around them, for the whole area. But then, they just say that, oh, it's not in my land. It's not my fault. So, of course, we cannot say that it's their fault. But then, this is why it's very important for things like RSPO, which encourages community relationships, community arrangements where they sort of help each other and all that. So I think this is also part of the socialization that happens with sustainable palm oil practices. So I think it's not always very clear the exact person who is the criminal. And this is the problem that Singapore faced when they tried to implement their Singapore transboundary law. So it's very hard to pinpoint, number one, which company was the one who was causing the exact piece or the exact PM 2.5 that reached Singapore, number one. And it's hard to also try to pinpoint the person responsible. Is it the company? Is it the CEO? Is it the manager? So it's a whole complicated thing. And I think they haven't actually sorted it out yet. It's something very new, so we can't really blame them. No other country has something like this. But that's why it's a new area in law that I think needs to be developed as well. Yeah, thank you.
So, thank you very much. Yeah, that's something that journalists could perhaps try and look into, and just to exploit from the legal point of view. Surin, your comments, please, in terms of governance, deforestation, and crime.
Many things to unpack there, so I'm not too sure how to address it. But maybe just talking about crime first. It's a good point raised, right? That if you say it's a crime, then there has to be criminals out there, right? And then you go after the criminals. But that's kind of like saying, okay, there's a war on terror, there are terrorists out there, and then you're going to go after the terrorists, right? So if you use the US response, they fly in with their drones and their missiles and start attacking another country. So you can't use that kind of approach with the Haze problem in ASEAN, right? Because you can't just simply blame a particular group of people, right? There's no single criminal. There's and different people may share a certain part of the blame. And they could be part of the supply chain, right? So imagine it more like a supply chain. Different parties are guilty at different stages. So there's no single criminal involved here. You and I are also guilty to a certain extent if you are buying products that are part of the supply chain that causes deforestation, clearing of peat and fire, right? And that's why the response to that should be that let's support sustainable products. Because if you buy RSPO certified products, then you have a certain kind of confidence that it did not come from a place where there was fire being used, and which has led to the haze, right? So so in that sense, companies that does not have a sustainable palm oil policy should be blamed. And these include the downstream companies that are buying the palm oil, and the oil palm companies themselves who are planting the palm or palm and may have cleared the area. But then it's not an easy situation, right? When you have smallholders, and smallholders, there are thousands of them. Can they be expected to be able to produce sustainable palm oil? Because as Alina said, you don't actually get much from planting palm oil that's that's certified as sustainable. The cost of the certification may be more than whatever premiums that you can get. And then going back to my earlier argument as well, it's not just oil palm. What about the other crops? What are the certification systems available for those other crops? Are people actually demanding that those other crops are produced sustainably as well? So I think this is where the battlefront should be, where as consumers you demand that all these things are produced sustainably, not just palm oil, but also maize, also sugarcane, livestock, and so on. So hopefully when people are demanding these things, then the steps would be taken to address those issues.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Let's look at the supply chain. Let's look at individuals like you and I. Let's be very comprehensive about where to lay the blame, if there is blame to be laid indeed. Yeah. Talking of laying the blame, Larry, ASEAN, how do you think ASEAN would take? I'm pretty sure this has been might have been forwarded to them. Like crime against is transboundary pollution or transboundary haze a crime against humanity? How what say ASEAN?
Well, ASEAN is not is still like you said, work in progress on that. I think if there were if there was a body in ASEAN that would be able to provide some guidance, it would be the ASEAN ministerial meeting on transnational crime. Now it so happens that the ASEAN action plan on transnational crime also references environmental crime, but it's not codified, right? So there's no real, as I think Helen already pointed out, there's no real definition of that. So there's been more emphasis on transnational crime like human trafficking, drug narcotics, and of course the entry point, in my mind, if you want to, if it has to be through the entry point of transnational crime, it would have to be illegal logging, wildlife, what do you call it, trading. So through the CITES, right, the Convention on International Trade on Endangered Species. So to me, that would be the proper way. But like many things in ASEAN, it's very driven by the enforcement agencies in this case, right? So it's the ministry, the home ministries, it's the those who are looking at the enforcement, not so much the prosecution of it, and it's left to the environmental ministries. And I think one of the things that we should note, of course, in Indonesia, we've combined those who provide license to the forests with those who are actually regulating the environment. So the ministry is, has this kind of dual personality. But these are just a specific case study that we need to be studying a little more as to what has been the impact of this. But the point is really, I think, to answer your question, I think criminality and the criminalization of environmental crimes is still a long way, has yet to be codified, standardized in terms of definition. If there is, however, at least a platform through the action plan. The action plan makes very clear references to environmental crime, and it also lays out a number of priorities like information exchange, legal matters, law enforcement training, and also institutional capacity building through this center called the ASEAN Center for Combating Transnational Crime. Perhaps that could be expanded. Its mandate could be expanded in this particular area of environmental crime. But that, of course, presumes that there are other activities, and here the environment ministries have to take the lead in defining what are environmental crimes. I think that's how it would work. I mean, very bureaucratic, but that's that's how it would actually be initiated, and it's possible. I think it's definitely possible.
Oh, that's really, really good to hear. Yeah. Well, we've got 3 minutes, and that leaves each of you 1 minute to give the journalists a takeaway. How would you? Okay, just a final message from each of you in 1 minute to the journalists. We start with you, Larry. 1 minute. Sorry, you need to unmute your microphone, please.
Mute myself. Yeah, I think if there was something that I would be really zeroing in on the ASEAN in transboundary haze, how it addresses transboundary haze, it's really in the area of of institutional governance, right? I think that's already been mentioned. There's been a lot of progress in overarching institutional frameworks, in strategic planning, etc. There's not so much been attention being drawn up on sanctioning, and I briefly touched on this before. On enforcement, on issues of what is the consequence of these crimes. So I think it's good that we ended up on crime, because that indeed should be the trigger point for what happens next in terms of the net result. But behind that, there are these issues that I think also need to be undertaken. I think the journalists would really look into what has been the national and regional experience in addressing this in terms of unmet goals, timely inputs, capturing the knowledge, and moving away from this captive institutional culture. I think that would be the area that I would explore further. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Larry. That's great. Moving on to Surin next, please.
Yeah, thanks. So I think to me, this issue of transboundary haze, deforestation, fires, and so on, there are many dimensions to it, and it's a very rich source of stories that the media can pick up on. So it doesn't always have to be on a macro level. It can be very human. It can be at a very personal level. You can focus on particular communities or societies that are impacted. You could focus on certain minority groups that are affected, as suggested by Helena. There's so many angles that you can focus on. I think that we need to hear those kind of stories and try to avoid the kind of very common or even cliched narratives that we get to hear about haze. It seems like whenever we hear a story about haze, these kind of narratives are repeated. Whether it's the orangutans that are displaced, or the oil palm companies that have to be blamed, and so on. I think we need to move away from this very kind of narrow viewpoints and actually expand the scope and let people understand the broader perspectives related to the issue.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Surin. And finally, Helena.
Okay, just going back to what Surin also mentioned, I think I also want to remind everyone about the Mekong part of the problem as well. And also I am guilty of that also. I started out looking at the southern problem, and I haven't moved on too much from there. But haze in ASEAN is not a single problem. There are sub-problems to it. And the story of the drivers in the north is different than the story of the drivers in the south. For some reason, the south gets talked about more. And I think that has led to things like, for example, ASEAN having whole programs for peatlands, but not programs for the types of agricultural land that exists in Mekong that is on fire, like what you saw the picture that I showed about the mountain being on fire. So it has indirectly or unnoticeably sort of ASEAN has focused, media has focused, academics have focused on the south. And there's this hidden problem that is happening in the Mekong that I think warrants so much more, not only local attention. It has to be regional, it has to be global as well. So I think that story needs to be told a lot more. So I'll end there.
That's really a really pertinent reminder, and I think there's lots of opportunity here for collaboration. So as ASEAN is trying to get together at the governmental level, perhaps media across ASEAN should also start working together, share stories, share solutions, and there might be very interesting products out of that, and there's funding available. There is one last minute question that's come in. Danny, may I get your permission to just get the folks to answer this?
Yeah, let's just go with that.
Thank you very much, Danny. Yeah. Okay, so a question from Indonesia. So let's see. How can we demand better responsibility from ASEAN in addressing deforestation and transboundary haze? Larry.
Yeah, I think we're alluding to this in Helena's segments, where we're really talking about how much harm, how much is affecting the citizen, the regular, the people whose livelihoods are affected by that. So to me, an emphasis on getting more voices, ensuring that you have a level playing field. These negotiations that are taking place are always state level or governmental level, and increasingly private sector, so company or private sector and government level, so business to government kind of thing. But it's really not an emphasis on the community. We all talk about social forestry, and there's been a lot of advances in social forestry, of course. But one of the things the biggest advance is how technology has allowed local communities to also have their voices. So I think the way to have better response, if that's what we're really the aim of that question, better responsibility is to get a better informed citizenry and those who are affected the most. I think that's really what needs to be focused on.
Thanks very much. A great answer, Larry. I can't top any of the sort of points that have been made. So the three asks from the three panelists, lots and lots to unpack from these last few hours. It's going to be available, I believe. So on Facebook, the recording is going to be available. So please go back, share it with your colleagues, collaborate. I think, as I said again, I'll just repeat that there's funding available, and Danny's probably going to repeat that again. I hope that you guys think of, that media thinks of interesting ideas. Researchers who have joined us today also think of interesting ideas to bring forward the conversation, to bring forward solutions to this very complex problem called transboundary haze. Thank you very much.